move around, I'll just adapt to that.
Good. From a wrist health consideration, as far as the contribution of the club or wrist as far as it moving this way through impact, and the lead wrist going this way, the trail wrist going that way, which is in essence kind of what invariably happens is let's call it release of the club because it's easy. That is there equal force around impact in both directions. Really what's unadvisable is when there's a dominance in one direction. And when you look at human movement anatomy in particular, really what things like the spine doesn't like is a dominance in one area. It doesn't do much of that, but it does lots of this. For example, whatever it might be, the wrist, it doesn't do much of that, but it does lots of this. So a pretty good predictor we can use is, are there equal amounts of kind of thumbs down with this as you approach impact? You look at any kind of the caveman we spoke about a little bit back in November, any kind of striking, chopping movement is normally a rotation with this movement. That almost goes back to, you look at those who've got kind of 2, 3, 4 5 year old kids at home, they go on whacking everything. That intuitive movement is that. But chopping, they rotate with kind of thumbs down, tree chopping, any kind of movement we have. That's kind of inherently kind of how we strike things as humans. So I think we can all hopefully see there that this value is almost more than double the left value, which really is representative of how Ben kind of releases the club perhaps is pretty excessively this way. So very much that way to impact. Which kind of really fits, I think, alongside kind of Ben's, in fact, let's not digress. Let's do it this way to keep it clean. I'm going to leave my cursor, it's over here for everyone to see. Just take a look at that value there. The rate of elevation we spoke earlier on. It's very, I know Ben's close to this, so Ben is a nice bad example, but let's be really kind of aspirational today and really.
That can be for a good bad example.
Let's really aspire to be, the best version of Ben in many ways. It's unusual to see that not start with a 3, if not high 3s, which really, again, team goes back to really how well Ben wants to elevate that lead hip, which is really reflective of, I think, how well they can press through that lead foot and expand through that lead hip. The idea of compression, expansion, that's all we ever do in life, compress and expand. So we start to see these kind of profiles now in Ben's case, where I think why that value is quite low with Ben, and let's give you another piece of data to look at again. Again, just everyone look at that value on screen. So take it in terms of move around, guys. Just be aware of the cables and whatnot, because we're a little bit, again, compressed. Seems to be a common theme today, expand and compress. So what that value represents on screen is how much laterally Ben's pelvis in downswing is moved this way. So from top of backswing to impact, how much lateral movement that pelvis is currently around that shift of that pelvis in downswing.
That's centimeter, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Centimeters left in this case, Hank, but good one though. Very good one. Dan, use it, wave it up to someone use it. It's the caffeine to get to it. But yeah, how much left the pelvis went. So kind of going back to that kind of slightly kind of crude reference we can use, but again it's a pretty reliable reference. Ben is quite clearly quite a wide framed human, which is good. I'm only jealous, Ben, that's actually not a bad thing to be for some reason. But it's not about right or wrong, it's about just accepting the bone structure we have and how can we best use what we have. So right or wrong, there's been as many narrow humans, probably if not more, that won major championships than probably wide humans. It's just the way it is. But it's more about how can we best move around that frame to really produce force. So let's start to kind of almost link together now those helical shapes, those frame shapes with maybe Ben's delivery data, and how it may then connect back to possibly why Ben's experiencing kind of right side pain and some kind of wrist and shoulder issues over life. That we know through design that the wider frame humans will often move less this way, but rotate more that way. So they almost keep that big toe connection in that lead foot, but just slightly longer than narrow humans. So if Ben was more my frame shape, narrow jawline, very narrow kind of rib cage and pelvis, it's not unusual. You can hopefully all see it on camera as well. Just to start to lose that connection and move more to that outside ball of the foot slightly sooner. Why? Because the pelvis is gliding more this way. But when you start to lose that big toe connection, you then start to reduce the ability to really elevate that lead size for impact. Equally so, the more we kind of move that way in downswing, the more it then starts to connect back with that kind of wrist delivery into impact, which is possibly why you're very dominant that way. The challenge is then, the more we move that way around those wide frames into impact, the more compression we get through that trail side, again through impact. And then, you know, you guys are coaches, so you've probably figured this connection already. Like that back to Ben's misses, bit pushy, bit hooky. Most likely is why we get that. And that, for me, then comes back a little bit to what we spoke about in November, the idea, when we look at how we move in the golf swing, there's normally something somewhere, not many things in many places. There's an imbalance that creates many adaptations. I think it's a really unhelpful approach again. I've got 5 things wrong, Ben hasn't. He has a very dominant move that's created many, many responses. So to get better at all of this, we've got to get better at that over here. Unfortunately, what the environment we've been exposed to in recent years is, I've got 10 things wrong. Because fear sells, doesn't it? Fear is a great sell. Everything's based around fear in some ways. So wrist pain, back pain, and ball flight going left, and Trackman says this, and force plate says that, and you haven't. Ben's just got perhaps a movement which doesn't maybe align best with the shape of his frame, but because of that, most likely it's created some pretty unhelpful responses, which is possible as being some pain issues and delivery data issues, which is then influencing viability, distance, that kind of stuff, which we can look at. So I'd be certainly curious for Ben to explore just reducing, and this is where language becomes so important. And I think language always catastrophizes things anyway, so we've got to be very precise in my words now. Let's reduce how much the pelvis shifts, not remove it. There's a big difference in just reducing and delaying the pelvis movement, not removing the pelvis shift. They're very, very different perceptions again. Let's just delay the pelvis going left in transition. Go on.
I was just thinking what that means for me.
Which is?
I mean, since I can't see my pelvis during the downswing or the transition, what does it mean to me as a golf?
Okay.
A golfer, basically? How do I translate those words into my emotions or my feels?
So let's explore that now then. So I know we're kind of being aware of all the different cameras today. So in transition, it's just delaying and reducing how actively the pelvis moves left in transition. So if I came to you moving that way, how would you help me? You're the coach. Now if I said I'm moving a long way that way in transition, how would you help me?
Either reduce going right in the backswing too much.
Can you show me?
Go too much. Here, there's going to be a shift backwards. Or either that, or since there's mass moving that way, something has to actually push up.
Which I love. Just show me, rather than explain. Good. Good. That's why we're giving 2 ears and 1 mouth, Ben, for a reason that we listen more than we speak. So just show me. So you'd be certainly very good, you'd be encouraging with Ben, brilliant by the way. Just delaying rather than removing. Just reducing rather than preventing. Just how words become so inflammatory in some ways when you look at them, and just allow for you to become more rotational rather than that lateral shift. And I think I'd be curious then that as you then start to move in the downswing, how we can then start to reduce some of that compression through that right side, and just start to kind of balance more how you start to release that club into impact. So even in a playful way, even without the club now, Ben, just going to place the club on the side there. If this was our kind of axe movement again, you show me how you would kind of really say your friend there, you would chop him with a, literally though, with an axe. How do you strike something? Good, so it's more rotational in Ben's case, and more thumbs down rather than. You'd like to think you wouldn't chop many objects this way. So anyway, like stop it, playfully just start to explore. Yeah.
Like so.
Yeah.
Reduce that basically
Yeah.
into.
Yeah. Which is why you're able to keep that connection through that big foot. So you start to play, and then vice versa, you may get someone who's a very narrow human, who moves the opposite of what Ben Wiley does. This maybe start to maybe explore more actively, allowing that pelvis slightly to glide that way in transition. And then how does that influence kind of cut moving? So just let the guys play with it. What's your kind of thoughts around that team as far as is interesting? In Ben's just a nice example of maybe the historical issues that Ben's had and dislikes. This is where you get this great conflict, and it's all about conflict. Maybe the way we see the planet, because of whatever, is maybe conflicting with this how perhaps Ben anatomically best moves to produce force or apply force in this case. So I think my expectations of Ben, not about me, I think certainly we can gain some length, for sure, because of that kind of club profile approaching impact. I think we can certainly look to reduce a lot of that irritation through that trail side and that wrist in particular. And certainly I think give you more flights to play with as far as can you hit with that real fade that starts a few yards left and falls back, which may be more problematic for you, possibly currently.
I can hit it both ways.
Yeah.
Then it's
Yeah.
a story of let it stay on my course even,
Yeah.
not on the hole I'm playing, but the whole golf course.
Right. So let's thank you, Ben, for doing that. It was great just to kind of explore Ben's kind of frame shape and imbalances that maybe he has and how it connects back to some of the club forces and kind of stuff. So in essence, I kind of describe movement, guys, essentially is about kind of become more, become less. That's the base of the human movement. Do a bit more of this and a bit less of that. Because look at, say, lockdown is a good example. Most of us did less and ate more, which is why many of us gained weight. So the basis of weight loss, isn't it? Do more, eat less. And I think in Ben's case, it's do less of this and a bit more of that. And I'll be curious, and I know he works with you back at your place, and how over the next little while it just starts to, my kind of back feels good, and that flight's now improving, and my distance is maybe increased. So let's start to do this all individually. So thank you, Ben, that's great. Let's just spread out again and let me come back round again and head to the middle. So again, the challenge with this done in group format is that I don't get the chance to kind of check you all individually. So kind of apologies for the I don't get a chance to come and help you. So take it for what it is. It's take a real view on this. It's just us playing in a group rather than unfortunately being able to come and accurately kind of help you, which we then obviously be a lot more precise. So let's just initially play with kind of both kind of almost extremes, the scale in some ways of movement. So everyone kind of just initially hands and arms across rib cage. But again, some will get it, some won't. It's just the dark side in some ways of large group-based tutorials where we can't really be kind of hands-on with both. And or just initially, and we also have to allow for the constraints you have around, there might be some neck issues, foot, that kind of stuff. Just initially, let's start to play with, can I rotate back, let's call it slightly flatter, because it's easy. And just feedback what that means to you. Just some kind of slightly flatter rotations. And there's no expectation at my end, I'm not trying to predict or expect, but when you do rotate, avoid it coming through the eyes. So You're still remaining looking downwards. And then once you've done that, then as you rotate into impact, there's less shift in the pelvis, like we discussed with Ben, and more rotation through both rib cage and pelvis into impact. You start to, again, Ben was so right in what he said there, which was brilliant. And he reminded me of what it means to him to move that way. And that's all we're exploring now. Just going to do a few more of those. What does it mean to me to rotate less in the backswing, to rotate less, slightly flatter, and then rotate? Does it allow you to rotate more and then into impact with less shift in your pelvis? So just, you might go, don't like that, but it doesn't matter. On this one now, let's start to elevate and rotate more, and then have a lot more lateral shift in that pelvis and down. So really extend and rotate more glide in the pelvis, keeping that big toe down, by the way, to avoid that big toe losing connection. And I think you'll hopefully some, not all, because again it's just the nature of kind of group-based stuff, may just start to find, I can really feel a bit more elasticity again, or it's a lot less irritable, or it's more meaningful, all these great words that we use, kind of move them one way right versus the other. So let's do that again. So flatter or less rotation, less shift, more elevation with rotation, more shift. Which one is a lot more soothing on the system? Which one kind of gives you more response? Which one do you feel like I can really relate to that?
First one. Flatter.
Well, yeah, that's great because
It's the second one that feels like complete loss of control.
which is kind of how you are currently moving, which is great. So that's a nice.
Express my golf game.
Well, did anyone get a preference either way? You don't have to, but it's not. There's no. But even when you're back at the club or at the range, or wherever you might be, just start exploring it. And it's quite nice that we've got some real kind of ranges of kind of narrow and wider humans, and just start to play with that. And certainly when you're working with players, you'll see they're just like a Molinari, like a Reed, like these Jonathan, they're just bigger humans through bone structure. They are just more glided that way, or narrow humans, very slim, narrow human beings that are more the other way. What do we think of that? Shape of the frame just kind of controls what we do. Right, it's what's the time, Hank? So
It's 5 minutes past 1.
just take a 5-minute break, guys. We've got a very active few hours coming up now.